Thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez for helping to support the channel. It's safe to say that Doctor Who wouldn't be as successful as it is without the companions. Characters who join the Doctor on their many adventures and help play a crucial role in episodes. Whether they be from modern day Earth or a different dimension, companions balance out the Doctor's eccentricity and serve as a relatable figure for the viewers of the show. I recently made a video chronicling the fates of every TV companion after they left the Doctor, but I was inundated with comments asking, what about this person? Why didn't you talk about that person? And it got me thinking, what actually is a Doctor Who companion? What separates them from the best of the rest? Is it the amount of time they spend in the TARDIS? Is it setting foot in the TARDIS at all? So naturally, I did what I always do. I decided to make a video about it. So join me as I attempt to work out what really makes a Doctor Who character a companion. And of course, remember that this is just my opinion, simply my subjective take. Try to keep that in mind when you're dying of drinking game inflicted liver damage after I say the word companion for like the 80th time. I did count, but I probably used it quite often when I went off script. So in terms of taking shots, just sit this one out. So when it comes to the complicated definition of companion, I decided to try and create categories for the different levels of supporting characters. So right at the very top, there are primary companions. These are exactly what you think of when you see the word companion. These are your Rose Tylers, your Susan Formans, Clara Oswalds, etc. They receive top billing in the show's credits and have the central focus alongside the Doctor, with multiple episodes as the Doctor's core ally for an extended period of time. They sometimes act like the Doctor themselves, and sometimes they even are the ones that save the Doctor and the day. A primary companion is someone who only ever comes second to the Doctor themselves. They're a permanent fixture of their time on the show, and they often have a detailed backstory. They play a prominent role within individual narratives, and they often serve as an audience surrogate the viewers can relate to. Of course, sometimes there are episodes like Waters of Mars or The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe where the supporting actor gets top billing. But these characters are just supporting characters. They don't receive the primary companion characterization because they don't fill the other prerequisites. They don't have that sustained period of travelling or that close ongoing relationship with the Doctor. It's the same reason you can't define any TARDIS traveller as a companion, because there is a laundry list of people who took short trips inside the time machine despite being nothing more than a side character, like Tesla or Edison or Captain Avery. One trip in the TARDIS doesn't automatically make you a companion, because there's so much more to account for. That's also why Liz Shaw still manages to be a primary companion despite never once stepping foot inside the TARDIS. She never left Earth, but she had an extended period of working directly alongside the Doctor, along with having that top billing as his assistant, so her companion status is just as valid as Jo Grant after her, because they filled the same consistent co-star role within the show. Next, we come to the secondary companions, who are often important side characters and interact with the Doctor, but only because of their pre-existing relationship with the primary companion. For example, Rose is a primary companion, but she lives with her mum, meaning Jackie ends up as a recurring character taking part in a number of adventures and even travelling in the TARDIS herself for like one trip. But despite that trip, she isn't a dedicated companion. Similarly, Francine and Tish only get involved in the Doctor's lifestyle because both they and the Doctor have a mutual defined relationship with Martha. These types of characters, whether they be family, partners or friends, are regular fixtures of the show, but they tend to end up staying on Earth, anchoring the primary companion to their home setting. Also like, Brian Williams or Danny Pink. However, simply being related to another companion doesn't immediately make a character a secondary companion. Just look at Graham O'Brien, who is the step-grandfather of Ryan Sinclair, but they both hold equal status as primary companions, spending the same amount of time travelling in the TARDIS and having significant roles during adventures. Along with this, it is also possible for a character to begin life as a secondary companion before upgrading their standing to primary. We saw this with Mickey Nikki Smith and Rory Williams, who started off as earthbound romantic partners of primary companions, only to then begin travelling full-time and earning the primary companion mantle themselves. So secondary companions exist in this weird state of not being prominent enough to be a primary companion, but hanging around so much that they deserve a category of their own pretty high to the top because of how often they show up and the recurring important role they play in a lot of adventures. Tertiary companions are probably the trickiest to define and probably the section of this video that's going to be the most debatable, because tertiary companions usually don't spend enough of a sustained, consistent period of time alongside the Doctor, but they do come and go enough to count as their own level of companion. I'm talking about characters like the Brigadier, Kate Stewart or River Song, characters who all have a direct relationship with the Doctor which exists regardless of their own relationships with primary companions. So they can't really be counted as secondary companions, even though they usually do just tend to stay on Earth and come and go. Yes, these characters are recurring parts of the show and do have a habit of turning up for big adventures with their own spotlight and focus, but that lack of consistent travelling just makes them their own entity, because they're essentially glorified one-story companions, who I'll get to later. I think Vinder is the perfect example of why tertiary companions exist on their own separate level. He was a major component of Series 13, spending time with the Doctor and her companions, and his return in Power of the Doctor establishes him as a tertiary companion rather than simply a one-story companion. Even though he has a particular spotlight in Flux, it isn't nearly enough to argue that he's a primary companion, and he's definitely not a secondary companion, so he just fits into the tertiary standing. Vinder is a notable character with multiple appearances, but his character simply doesn't fit within those other two categories, so he's perfect to just kind of scrape his way into this not quite category. But that's not to say tertiary companions are any less valuable than primary or secondary companions, because like with characters like River Song, they can have a huge influence on the show and the Doctor themselves. But in terms of their status as a companion, they just kind of fit into this third tier almost. And of course, it is possible to start off as a primary companion before converting into a tertiary companion later on, as the character's role is minimised in their future appearances. Like we saw with Captain Jack Harkness. He began as a primary companion in the later quarter of Series 1, but he soon left the TARDIS and became a recurring character with his own spin-off, cementing him as one of the most notable tertiary companions because he doesn't really come back to consistently travel in the TARDIS. He just appears here and there, gets involved in an adventure or two, and then goes on his merry way. The same can be said of Sarah Jane Smith, who started as the primary companion of the Fourth Doctor before the modern era developed her into a regular side character, once again with her own spin-off. So like Jack, while she still had a lot of significance within the show, she just didn't really have the characteristics of a primary companion anymore, which again isn't a bad thing, it just means the character has changed. It's hard to explain what exactly a tertiary companion is, because each one is so different, but it's safe to say that they are their own entities and deserve a specific title to reflect that, because they are regular allies of the Doctor in their own ways. We then have one-story companions, who are supporting characters over the course of a lengthy story, such as Professor Jericho. Jericho was an important character during Flux, but he is introduced and killed off within that same 6-part story, so you can't quite claim he has enough longevity or adventures to count as a primary, secondary or tertiary companion. He is obviously more significant than your usual supporting characters, and he spends a lot of time travelling with Dan and Yaz, but he's just not quite enough of a recurring character to ascend to tertiary status, especially because he doesn't really have much of a relationship with the Doctor. Controversially, I think the same applies to Sarah Kingdom in terms of TV events only. Sarah was an enemy turned brief companion during the events of the Daleks' master plan, until she died at the end of that story. She did spend time travelling in the TARDIS between episode 6 and episode 11, but this was all part of that one specific story. These travels were in service of a wider narrative, exactly like Jericho much later on. Sure, Big Finish elevated her status to primary companion with a number of standalone stories set during this period of travelling, but in terms of purely TV stories, she is nothing more than a one-story companion without staying on for longer. Adam Mitchell is another example of one of these types of short-lived companions, being kicked out at the end of his very first adventure, while Katarina died during her first story, being even less of a companion than Sarah Kingdom, although the BBC seems to officially count Count Katerina and not Sarah for some strange reason. It is, of course, a bit harsh to say someone shouldn't count as a companion even if they spend like 4 episodes travelling in the TARDIS, but the brutal truth is that at the end of the day, they still only appear for one story, meaning they can't become anything more significant or involved because, yeah, there are random side characters in Modern Who have just as much screen time. Lastly, at the bottom of this pyramid are the supporting characters. Due to Doctor Who's nature of always visiting new locations and featuring new faces, there are always one-off characters who aid the Doctor in an adventure and then nothing more. They don't have enough of a role or enough focus to be a one-story companion, because they have such a brief participation within the Doctor's life. These are your characters like Shona, Nancy or Ida Scott. They help the Doctor save the day, but that's the extent of their involvement. They're very common staples of the show, just these one-off characters who play their part and never become anything more. Because yeah, they're just a supporting character. Even Donna was one of these characters when she first appeared, having a whirlwind wedding before returning to normal life once the Rachnos were defeated. Obviously Donna would later return and become a primary companion, but in The Runaway Bride she was nothing more than a stopgap until the actual new companion came along. But an interesting thing to note is Donna, like a few other supporting characters, was actually offered the chance to become a full primary companion, although she turned it down. Yes, for every successful TARDIS invitation, there are a plethora of failed ones, mainly extended towards supporting characters, and often that's why they only remain supporting characters. Whether this be due to a refusal or a grisly death, a lot of supporting characters almost break into primary companion territory. Just look at starry-eyed Linda with a Y, who the Doctor immediately invites to travel with him, only for her to then be brutally killed by Daleks. And then you have Madame Pompadour, who ends up dying young and alone. Jenny, Rita and Astrid are other names on the long list of potential companions dying before they could actually claim the official title. Others, like Joan Redfern and Perkins, say no because they have their own reasons to stay exactly where they are. But all of these unsuccessful invites highlight the difference between a companion and a regular, albeit standout, supporting character. Every primary companion starts off as a supporting character in their first episode, but if they accept a TARDIS invite and actually make it out of the adventure in one piece, that's what then turns them into an actual companion. To use one of my many random football analogies that go completely over my audience's head, it's like a championship side reaching the playoff final only to lose. Sure, they can say they were almost a Premier League team, but at the end of the day, they're no different to the team that finished 21st. They're still a championship team. A fantastic example of the importance of this choice of whether to become a primary companion or stay a supporting character is Dan Lewis, who initially starts off as any other side character, kidnapped by an alien and being saved by the Doctor. But due to the events of The Flux, Dan gets caught up in all the chaos, and it's not until the end of War of the Centaurans that he finally gets a proper invitation and voluntarily chooses to become a primary companion. This single decision propels him from the bottom to the top and solidifies him as a full-blown companion who has further adventures separate from a single story. It's also why Grace Holloway, on the other hand, remains a mere supporting character despite many fans considering her a companion. She was the surgeon who accidentally killed the 7th Doctor before helping his successor defeat the Master, but by the end of the TV movie, she declined the 8th Doctor's invitation to travel with him properly. She outright turns him down and walks away, once again showing the importance of a supporting character's response to being offered the stars. In general, the status of most companions is solidified by having a specific scene or moment where they make the conscious decision that yes, they do want to travel with the Doctor. Sometimes it takes a little while, like with the 13th Doctor's fam, but there's almost always the explicit confirmation of joining the TARDIS in an official full-time capacity. Although, as you're no doubt rushing to remind me, obviously there are some exceptions to this, such as Ian and Barbara, who were essentially kidnapped by the Doctor and left at the first possible opportunity, even though they travelled with him for like 2 years of the show. And there's also Harry Sullivan, who was an unwilling passenger and stayed on Earth the first chance he got. But even though these characters never really made the decision to join or not, they ultimately spend enough time alongside the Doctor across multiple separate stories and have enough of a primary companion characterization, so they still easily count as fully fledged companions nonetheless. It's incredibly hard to define what a Doctor Who companion actually is. There's no foolproof and faultless formula to work it all out. It's not exactly a science. Even my pyramid is flawed, since you could argue River is actually a secondary companion due to her origin story, while still being a tertiary companion because of how often she shows up. So the lines end up blurred pretty often. But speaking generally, I feel like a companion needs to have many different aspects of their character to qualify them as an actual companion. The Doctor chooses their companions and allies incredibly carefully because they put a lot of trust into these people, so they only travel with the best, the cream of the crop. This means the companion title will always be very exclusive. As cringy as it sounds, it doesn't really matter whether someone is officially labelled a companion or not. What truly matters is how heroic they are and the impact they have on the story. Just look at Sally Sparrow. She went to great lengths to save the Doctor's life, and yet she barely interacts with him. So she's not a companion, but she's a definitive hero. It's entirely possible and incredibly common for a supporting character to still have the same kind of impact as a primary companion. The hostess from Midnight saved the Doctor's life. Lorna Bucket also sacrificed herself, along with countless characters like Duggan, Harriet Jones, and historical figures playing vital roles in the Doctor's adventures without being a companion. This all goes to show that the titles don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. The companions are just the supporting characters who manage to make out alive and willingly choose to continue their association with the Doctor. There's also no such thing as the perfect companion. There's no one character who has every single ideal companion trait because they're all people with flaws and complicated personalities. That's what makes them so interesting, because of their different reactions to the situations they're thrown into and how they interact with the Doctor. Whether a character is a companion for a lengthy period of the show or just a single story, they're all incredibly valuable and provide a crucial backbone to Doctor Who as a whole, keeping it fresh and making the universe feel like a beautiful and varied place full of friendly faces to balance out all the terrifying foes. So the title doesn't matter, the actions do. And as always, thank you for watching. And an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patron Fallon Cortez, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nyx Games, and all of my Gold level patrons Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Francois AK Line Vortex, Gog Nogler, Herna Verzog, Luke_SY, and T for Simp. Thank you all so much for your support.